Thank you, Joe. I worked 35 years in this building right behind us, the Dayton Metro Library. And about 30 years ago, there was a little article in the Parade magazine. Does everybody know Parade magazine? It had an article, a little tiny question and answer. You know, it's the first thing I look at in the paper on Sunday morning. I take the Parade and I look inside all the different questions that are in there. Well, lo and behold, it was a question like this. Who is this famous Natalie Barney that nobody knows about? She lived in Paris. She was famous for her writing, and she was the most notorious lesbian since Sappho. And she was born in Dayton, Ohio. How did that happen? I had never seen a question like this before in Parade magazine. Well, I'm going to give you a quick little background about what do we know about Natalie Barney. From that point on, I started to investigate, and I have visited where she lived 3 times in Paris and her grave a number of times, and met people who knew her. She was very famous in Paris. We know she was born October 31st, she always made fun of that, 1876. Just a few blocks from here in downtown Dayton, actually at the corner of 5th and Wilkinson, where there used to be a very nice home. Her father was Albert Clifford Barney, a wealthy businessman whose father, E.J. Barney, founded the Barney Smith Railroad Car Company, which was the largest employer here in Dayton, but that was many years ago. And Mr. Barney, her grandfather, was the one who built the arcade for $2 million, which we're trying to bring back nowadays. So there are some connections. Her mother was an extremely talented portrait artist, and Albert met her in Cincinnati, and Alice Pike Barney's father was a Pike, and he built the Pike Opera House in Cincinnati. So the arts and money, those were the 2 things that Natalie liked very much, and it served her well the rest of her life. Now, why is she famous, and why are we honoring her here? Well, when I visited her grave in Passy, which is a very small cemetery in Paris, in 1988, I found the answer for the first time that no one ever wrote about. There's an inscription on her tombstone of one word that she wants you to remember her by. And the word in French is écrivain, or in English, writer. She loved writing, and she knew how to write, and she knew every famous writer of the 20th century personally. She was a prolific writer. She was also a lesbian, a feminist, and a pacifist. What a combination. Natalie was unconventional and broke many barriers for women. She published a book of lesbian love poems in the year 1900, which her father quickly confiscated all the copies, bought them up, and destroyed them. But that didn't deter Natalie. 2 years later, when her father died and she inherited a huge inheritance of millions of dollars, she took the Orient Express to the Greek island of Lesbos, where Sappho lived in the year 500 BC, and with her lover, Renee Vivienne, a very well-known British poet, they were going to start a group of women poets. But the residents of the island would have nothing to do with that. So they ran them out. Renee Vivienne was the love of her life, and that was a very sad story. Renee died in 1909, very tragic. It's been said by scholars that Natalie Barney was the most famous lesbian poet since Sappho, who lived in 500 BC. And I've looked that up and verified that, and it's just unbelievable. Nobody knew this. Natalie Barney was the foremost French feminist writer of the 20th century, according to French scholars. Something else we didn't know until recently. Natalie moved to Paris in 1900, and she had been to finishing school there years before, but she settled there. And then in 1909, she rented a townhouse on the left bank, and she rented it until 1972. And that's where she lived with her millions of dollars, and all her famous writer friends gathered. She loved writing and celebrated gifted writers by inviting them to her Paris home at number 20 Rue Jacob. Guess who lived down the street? Picasso. And on the other side lived F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda when they were in town. And Colette lived down the street 2 blocks. I mean, there were famous artists and writers everywhere around the left bank. For 60 years, American and British expatriates of writers and artists were invited by personal invitation when Natalie's chauffeur would deliver them a week before and invite them to her literary salon. There were readings from writers, musical performances, excerpts from plays, lively conversations always, and culture and writing and the arts were celebrated. Invitations to the literary salons were coveted by many famous people who attended. See if you recognize some of these names. Gertrude Stein, Sylvia Beach, who underwrote the publication of James Joyce's landmark book, Ulysses. James Joyce himself attended. F. Scott Fitzgerald was there almost every week for 10 years. Ezra Pound, who Natalie underwrote in terms of his publishing, was there regularly. Mata Hari, of all people, was there, and she rode a white horse into the salon grounds at one of the gatherings. Dancer Isadora Duncan did dances at the salon. Ernest Hemingway came in and read from his works before they were published in America. There were just endless writers who came. I found documentation that Truman Capote, someone in our own time, found great support by attending the salons and meeting the famous writers. Natalie assisted all these writers with money because she had it, and that's what she wanted to do, was to help them. And many of them survived and didn't starve because of Natalie's support. Natalie knew from the age of 12 that she was attracted to women. There was no question. Now, how did she know this? Her mother was a portrait artist and had a studio in Washington, D.C. And do you know what Natalie's mother said to her? Alice said to Natalie, you know, a lot of these women are very nervous getting their portraits painted. So would you just sit at their feet and would you soothe their ankles? So Natalie obliged. She celebrated her attraction to women in her literary works of poetry, epigrams, fiction, and plays. She was in a lesbian relationship with the American painter Romaine Brooks for over 50 years. And that was unheard of in those days. Many of her works have not been translated into English, but more are being translated all the time. She spoke fluent French, but the Dayton Library does own quite a few of her biographies, and we've made up a bibliography today. We're going to hand out at the reception the books that are available to read here on Natalie. She's well known in Paris. I went to bookshops on the left bank all around where she used to live until 72 when she died. And I said, do you know Miss Barney? Oh, oui, Miss Barney, the famous woman from Dayton. I said, you know, nobody in Dayton knows about her. And they said, what is Dayton? And I said, well, it's a Midwestern town, and the Wright brothers came from there, and they did know that, you know. I did say that's where NCR was from, but I can't say that anymore, can I? Okay. Natalie's well known all over Europe, but barely known around here. The only painting of an American in the Museum of the City of Paris is of Natalie Barney by Romaine Brooks. And in my PowerPoint slideshow today in the auditorium, which you're welcome to later on, we're going to show those photos of those portraits. I like to remember Natalie with the inscription on her tombstone that she added under the word writer. I am that being of legend, full of life. And she truly was full of life. Today, with the dedication of this Ohio historic marker, Natalie is now a legend in her hometown of Dayton, Ohio, never to be unknown again, and our lives are richer by celebrating her fame. Thank you.